the underappreciated opportunity that publishers have in multicultural marketing. Please welcome Albert and his panel.
Thank you. First and foremost, pleasure to be here. We hope that what we provide today in the panel discussion is insightful and have been inspiring as well as sort of captures sort of the I don't even call it hidden opportunities, kind of the opportunity sort of lies beneath that still kind of lies in plain sight. So without further ado, I'm going to let the panelists who have joined me today introduce themselves. Again, I'm Albert Thompson. I head up digital at Walton Isaacson, full-service agency, but we are very much an agency about culture. We've done multicultural pretty much since our infancy, so this is a topic we in our agency are pretty passionate about, but there's a lot of things we've learned and discovered. Our panelists here today, and I'm going to let them, again, introduce themselves a little bit about their background, are actually partners we work with. So when we think about the notion of culture, they're very much a part of the establishment to support us as an agency. They're part of that journey, and they're part of that sort of consumer pursuit that we're after for our audiences that we represent, and in particular the brands we represent as well. So I'll let Stephanie and then Damian introduce themselves very quickly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Delgado, and I am the digital account executive over at Blavity. Just to give you a little background on what Blavity is, we are a media company with 5 owned and operated sites, along with 2 conferences that we host throughout the year. Our properties cover everything from politics, news, sports, to travel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Damian Pelliccione. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and he, him, his. And I am the CEO and co-founder of REVRY. We are the world's largest LGBTQ streaming platform, both digital VCTV, CTV broadcast, as well as OTT direct-to-consumer AVOD, SVOD hybrid.
All right, sounds good. So I think, we started talking to MediaPost about putting this panel together. We talked about culture is sort of that missed opportunity in publishing. I think, part of it is when you think about content consumption, and we're not talking about the content management engine that powers it. We're not talking about the editorial staff writing it. When you consume information, when you read, you do it as an individual. And you do it from the primary perspective of the cultural lens that you represent. I mean, when you read it, it's all about how you self-identify. But when you take a step back and you talk about publishing, there's not a huge context for culture in the notion of publishing and how culture drives and sort of shapeshifts identity, societal norms, behaviors, beliefs, all that, et cetera, et cetera. But when a user reads and consumes stuff on the internet, it doesn't really matter if it's in Washington Post or CNN or if it's essentially on Twitter or Facebook. Everything starts with how you identify sort of at the human level. So a lot of what we wanted to get into today is really sort of talk about why is that? Why is it a missed opportunity? How those in the publisher sector need to sort of dial into that, because when you start to look at the future of consumption, it's going to be a lot of people that represent these audiences that are essentially going to be churning the internet, churning the content for success. So again, when we look at it, we think about not just publishing for the sake of creation, but we think about it in terms of audience alignment. You're creating content, you want people to read it, there's an audience you're trying to cultivate. From an advertiser standpoint, from a brand perspective, a brand looks at a platform and says, well, who do you have and why do they come there? What's the relevancy? And if there are nuances, do you really capture essentially those nuances and how you speak to them? So again, let's kind of get into the conversation. And when you think about an individual, they don't consume content based on necessarily its transactional value. When they think about a cultural moment, they don't identify with how it costs. And for them, it doesn't even necessarily have to have a cost associated to get that aspect of that. So perhaps you two can talk in particular about Blavity and REVRY in their creation. What was that sort of, or what were those cultural moments that made those 2 platforms matter? What was that sort of light bulb, sort of epiphany to say, oh, like this needs to be developed, this needs to be created. No one is speaking this way, no one sort of merchandise that. And Damon, I'm actually going to start from you from a REVRY perspective, just because an LGBTQ platform around connected TV just isn't really a thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're actually just celebrating 4 years since we had the conception, which was really kind of inspired after the Apple TV 4th generation when Apple introduced tvOS. I actually bought the Apple TV the 4th Gen one, because I'm a self-proclaimed Apple-phile, have to have all the toys when they come out. And I searched LGBTQ, and there was 0 apps on tvOS when it first launched in October 2015. That's when the light bulb came out. We saw an opportunity in the marketplace, and I'm one of 4 fabulous co-founders who are also watching online with my entire team back in Los Angeles. And what's really, I think, unique and interesting about our founding team is, and I'm only 1/4 owner, we're 50% women of color founded and 75% POC founded. Our chief business officer, Chris Rodriguez, is obviously a Latino queer man. I identify as a queer non-binary man. And then we also have Aaliyah and LaShawn. Aaliyah's an ally, and LaShawn obviously she's a queer woman. But what's unique to this is that we all came together understanding the market from an underserved place, and that culturally, when you look at queer media, and we use the word queer, not LGBTQ, because it's more encompassing, and we focus on the culture of queer, not your sexual identity or your gender marker. It has been really more reflective of me, a white, cisgender, gay man. And not really reflective of the other aspects of our community, which is so multicultural, so multi-generational, and gender identity and multifaceted, that when you look at the opportunity there, there was obviously something much bigger than what we anticipated. And then cut to today, we're on all OTT platforms, mobile, desktop. We're on Pluto. We've been on Pluto for 2 years, Zumo for a year. We launched Comcast this year. We just announced TiVo Plus 2 days ago. And we're about to launch 8 new virtual cable channels between now and the end of Q1. And what makes us the most unique value proposition, I think, for us is we own the segment. We have LGBTQ exclusive on all of these virtual cable environments for usually a period of 1 to 2 years. So now we own the lock and key to the largest amount of video inventory for this very lucrative and scaling demo.
Yeah, so Blavity has been around for 5 years, and we're very proud that our CEO is a woman of color. She is a Black millennial, and the way Blavity was founded was she was sitting in her lunch table at college, and then just was having a conversation with her friends. And then more Black people started to join the conversation, and she felt like in the world where you have the Beyoncés of the world, the Childish Gambinos, there's also still really bad things happening to that community. So what she wanted to do was create a platform for Black millennials, by Black millennials, speaking to the audience the way that she would like to read and understand the news. And she also felt like the outside was in, like a property that covered everything. So like I mentioned, our audience can come to one of our sites and look at travel, then go to our other sites and talk about health, beauty, go to our other side and be invested in politics. So we're really proud of that. And all of our founders are also are people of color as well.
That's great. And give them the audience a little bit of just a quick soundbite on Afrotech. Afrotech is their Black millennials in tech platform. I think, look, let's just be clear. When you think about who culturally is synonymous with, technology as a sector, startups, Black millennials in tech probably does not come first to mind. So, if you can give them kind of a quick soundbite as to sort of the why Afrotech is in existence and some of the successes.
So Afrotech is a conference that we host every fall in the Silicon Valley. We have over 4,000 attendees, partners such as Lexus being one of them. And it's just very important because it gives a space for Black millennials to go there and actually get to network, see all the brands that are out there. And I don't think there is a space really out there that brings all of this together. So it's been pretty successful. We have speakers such as Common, the artist, coming to speak. We just recently signed Charlemagne the God, a radio host, and he's going to be a panelist this year as well.
Sounds good. So, I think everyone understands that, the publishing industry is sort of always torn between this notion of cultural consciousness and commercial necessity, meaning it's got to make money. So a lot of the times the focus on culture and the ability to identify gets overlooked because you got to put out information. You got to put something that's going to monetize. whether it's for lead gen purposes, for subscription purposes, or page views. Perhaps you guys can sort of, having said that, it's not about necessarily creating identity. And the notion of belonging, again, belonging is like a subscription, not belonging in terms of this content or publisher produces information that I just love and loathe because it so grabs me and I can connect with it easily, and I'll stay with it for life as long as the editorial is very, very rich. So how would you all say that you've leveraged culture as like the path towards monetization? The path towards profitability. Both your platforms, from a content perspective, make money. And I think part of the hanging thread with culture is, can you make money from it versus just putting out information that can just be monetized and churned like anything else on the internet? So perhaps you can speak to how that stays front and center and then how that comes full circle.
Yeah, so great question. I think Stephanie can attest to this. My job predominantly, if I'm pitching investors or pitching ad media companies to buy more branded or more inventory from us, is just educating on the opportunity for this market. Let's talk numbers for a second, if I can go there. In the United States alone, the LGBTQ market has a disposable income of $917 billion a year. $917 billion a year. Globally, $4.3 trillion, right? So that's not a small market. And then if we look at the generations, 20% of millennials, which is now the largest consumer base in the world, hard identify as LGBTQ. 20%, 1/5 of the largest consumer base identify as LGBTQ. But now, twice the size of that is Gen Z, which is the hottest new, obviously, demo that everyone is trying to target and future target, right? 52% of Generation Z will not declare a gender or sexual orientation. 52%. And if we break into how many are LGBTQ hard identified, 35%. 35% of Gen Z. So with those two demos, we have scale in the next 10 years, because we all know by 2030, in 10 years, those two demos will be the most lucrative and largest demographic in the world, hands down. Now, bringing this back to culture, we focus on marketing ourselves from the culture of queer. Again, not your sexual orientation. We don't care. And to be honest, most of our viewers are not necessarily LGBTQ. We have data that proves, just like watching RuPaul's Drag Race or anyone who's a fan of Queer Eye or Disney's Love, Simon, that now queer content is more popular in the mainstream than it has ever been. RuPaul just won the second Emmy Award for Best Reality Series. So did Queer Eye 2 years in a row. And this is showing that, the opportunity is actually far-reaching beyond our own community. And so this is kind of like where we look at. And then more importantly, and we've heard this in other conversations this week, is that because we're such an identity-driven brand, our tag is unapologetically queer. That was our marketing campaign at World Pride in New York City, 4 million people this year. I wore those t-shirts and we gave them to a select number of influencers on the streets. We had overwhelming demand. We sold over 10,000 units of t-shirts just by handing out a t-shirt that said unapologetically queer, and the REVRY moniker was just on the sleeve, because it speaks to the generation, its cause and mission, and more importantly, culturally and identity driven. And that is the brand of REVRY, and that's what we focus on, and that's our scale and our opportunity. Anyone wants to invest? Come find me.
So as a salesperson, my job is really, to go into the agencies, to the advertisers, and let them know why they should be spending, with the African-American community. And one of the stats that I always like to tell them is, you are missing out. Like, the Black spending power has reached, it's in the trillions since 2015, and is only going to continue to grow. So if a Black millennial sees a brand in a website that they trust, a website that they see themselves in, they're more likely to, buy the product. So for example, when Rihanna put out her Fenty Beauty line, it sold out in Sephora within minutes. Why? Because they trust Rihanna. She looks like one of, she looks like them. So they're more able to, just to trust her.
Great. Thank you. So I think one of the other things we talk about publishing, in particular online, digital publishing, we always talk about metrics. And metrics has always come down to engagement. Everyone's kind of fancied the notion of FBLE, or Facebook level engagement. And when you look at the studies for Facebook level engagement, Hispanics are off the charts. I mean, they basically break the statistical curve of Facebook. Most FBLE is rather mediocre, except when you look at Hispanic, then it looks outstanding because it's like 20 times sort of the norms. And we've seen this in work with some of our clients as well. So, Stephen, let me ask you, for someone whose background is El Salvadorian, why is it that you, and Damian, you can chime in as well, feel that the engagement level when you start to look at, Hispanic leading, but even for Black in the queer segment, is so high and so off the charts in comparison? Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to monetize content and publishing, you have to do it off the people who are going to churn it the hardest, the fastest, the most frequent, which just happen to be, when you start to look at statistical proof, whether it's eMarketer or Pew or whoever, tends to be people at a strong clip that are just non-white. So perhaps you can offer a little bit of perspective for the audience as to why there just seems to be such a hunger for it there, and why that, at the end of the day, ends up being audiences that you can more effectively monetize.
So I think Black millennials are just influencers. There's a thing as, for you guys that don't know maybe, Black Twitter, for example. If they like a product, they're talking about it on Twitter. If they don't like your product, you're gonna get dragged. And by that means, it's like they're going to say how they really feel. So I think Black millennials are just influencers. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about engagement, and again, I can only talk to my experience. On our AVOD side of our product, and even our VCTV, we say VCTV, virtual cables, because let's face it, cable is dead, telco, satellite, all that is not a thing. It's all cable in the cloud, really. We do about 25 to 35 minutes a day per user on the free version, and then on our subscription side, 3 to 4 hours a week. That's a lot of engagement, right? And they're watching a lot of ad pods, and they're clicking through to things. And actually, everything that we have is non-skippable. So we sell at premium CPMs. We're selling at $35 to $50 CPMs, and sometimes we'll go upwards as $100 to $120 pending targeting and what the campaign is in the time of year, right? So we're able to command this price because we have such great engagement, and I have proof of those metrics, and that's how my sales team is successful. My issue is the opposite of a lot of you, is that I need more supply. I have so much demand, I need more supply. Hence why we're able to agilely move into all of these different new virtual environments. And truly what I believe is that the future is linear, but it's linear and it's virtual. It's the Plutos, the Zumos, the Samsung channels, the Roku channels of the world, because those are always on environments. They have a 98% completion rate on the ad unit, right? Whether or not they're really paying attention to it, who the fuck cares? Excuse my French. It doesn't matter. It just means that it's being engaged, consumed, and measured. And that's all that really makes a difference for the ad buyer, right? Now, where I think it will go eventually is that those ad units need to become more interactive. And the issue is that with broadcast, you can't, because it still works in a similar fashion. We send an HLS stream into Pluto's EPG, Electronic Program Guide. And I can't window any kind of ad tech in front of that. One, because I have the block of whatever Viacom wants to do with their player. But then two, outside of something that has a call to action, that has an indirect call to action, I should say, we can't really measure it. But one example that we did use, and I talked about this in our roundtable yesterday, we live stream, actually right now, today, in a couple of hours, we're going to be live streaming GLAAD's LGBTQ presidential debate on our Pluto channel exclusively. Everyone's there except for Beto and Sanders. I don't know why. In Cedar Rapids as we speak. And we actually sold really high CPMs against that because it's an LGBTQ presidential forum. But we also do the Trevor Gala. Trevor, for those who don't know, Trevor Project is one of the largest LGBTQ NGOs in the United States, and it's all about suicide prevention. And their gala is super star-studded and celebrity-driven, and we live stream it into our properties in true live form with a small delay, 5-10 seconds. And what we did this last time as kind of a case study in New York for the Trevor Gala in New York, and we have the LA one coming up, is we used a text-to-pledge technology that essentially encouraged people to donate while they're watching, because that I can project through our digital means, right, without any interactivity. We raised $500,000 in the first hour on the red carpet for Trevor through text to pledge, right? Call to actions, had high engagement. We put it on every platform from social to VCTV to all of our owned and operated, our CTV, you name it. And now all these NGOs are knocking down my door and they're like, can we do that with you? Can we do that with you? Can we do that with you? And I'm like, yeah, of course, for a price.
It's interesting, some of the elements you went into, because what I hear when you're trying to come up with a content model or publishing model is signal data. What is it you've seen or been able to do, test and learn to validate viability of creating, content information culturally specific for an audience? I mean, if we do it, will they use it? Will they read it? So perhaps, in simple sort of bullet point, quick sound bites, just speak to, because I think that's what people are going to figure out. Like, okay, we're starting to get it. How do we build a business model? How do we pivot around culture sort of mattering, putting that front and center, sort of the tip of the sword, versus kind of glossing over it and not really doing it effectively? It seems like you guys, both platforms, have employed or looked at a lot of things to say, okay, this is a thing. Let's start to create and then see what the uptick is, and then start to decide what does that engine look like.
Yeah, I mean, we just did it. In a lot of, I hate to say this, but we just did it, right? We're a startup. You have to be nimble, you have to be lean, and you just have to trial and error. I think you said it earlier, no one really, or someone on your panel said, no one really has the answer, and there's no guidebook or rule book yet, right? And that's the truth. We're all figuring it out. Publishers want to be TV networks, and TV networks want to be publishers, right? And that's this intersectionality that we're kind of all colliding with in terms of figuring out, A, what the metric is for you versus someone else, versus a brand, versus an agency, versus a network, versus a film distributor who just puts their stuff up or starts to syndicate it through means like Tubi. I think the biggest thing for us is that we've just been able to move into more environments faster, agilely, and again, keep focusing on our core, our mission, and our cause, which is, that we represent everybody within our community and we're authentic to that brand and that identity.
Yeah, I think you said it best. At Blavity is all trial and error. We're trying to find out what works for us and then what is also working for the audience as well. From our 5 O&Os to then our conference, we're trying to see how else we can expand.
Okay, great. So, and kind of bringing this to a close, when you think about sort of the future of publishing, there are a few platforms in the business who I would say sit at that sort of intersection of culture and X. Refinery 29 is definitely a platform. Complex, who I know is participating in the conference. Fader is another one. Hypebeast is another, and some of these partners we've worked with. Those are so few, and when you add up whether it's the revenue model they represent or just the user base they represent, they're I don't even know if they're pushing the 1% of the total. So why do you think that more publishing houses just haven't made the hard pivot? Look, it's very different for Time Inc. to acquire Essence Magazine as a portfolio play. It'd be very different if every magazine under Time Inc. got written partially through the lens of black women. That's a totally different play. So you have packaged goods companies that will declare how much revenue growth they're going to get through multicultural audiences, and they'll put it in press releases. Verizon's done it, Toyota's done it, our client Lexus has always been committed to it, Bank of America. But again, this is kind of the number one player in every category, and that's not necessarily the number 2 and 3. So it seems that there's someone who gets it and everybody else is somewhere else. So what do you think is, at a very honest level, sort of the barrier in terms of the pivot just not being made universally?
I think advertisers need to start thinking about multicultural buys as a first thought and not coming in after, like, oh, we have remaining funds, or, it didn't work out here, let's allocate these funds to this funds. I think if they start thinking about us on a first thought, I think it'll be executed correctly.
Look, the riches are in the niches, right? And the problem is, it's true, it still matters today. But the problem is, I'm sorry to call this out, is majority of the decision makers are still heteronormative, conservative, white, cisgender men. And that is not the future of the community. I'm sorry, you will be the minority eventually. You will be. It's just the future. And one of the most important things is to make sure, whether you're an agency, a brand, a publisher, that your team is reflective of the future of what the communities are going to look like. You need to have women in C-suites. You need to have women of color. You need to have LGBTQ. You need to have Latino. And they need to be making decisions creatively and business, in terms of business, in order for your brands to survive. Great example, Playboy. Editor is queer. Half of the people on the staff are queer. And they targeted a mass appeal and did a pop-up at Pride this year. Playboy. Playboy is probably the first thing that most of you straight guys looked at when you were young that you found in your daddy's shelf in his closet. But now they've pivoted to being gender inclusive, body inclusive, orientation inclusive. They've had trans playmates, transgender people on the cover. I even heard rumblings that there could be a male playmate in Playboy, right? That is something that should tell you if a legacy brand like Playboy is doing that, then everybody in this room should be doing that. And again, like Stephanie said, culture and cause first when it comes to your marketing campaigns and when you're buying stuff from us. And please, come buy stuff from us.
So thank you. That kind of wraps it up. Thank you for the feedback and the rich conversation. And I'm not sure we open it up for questions.
Yeah, we have some time for questions. Right here.
Thank you. Great panel. Certainly the best dressed panel. So
I was going to say, this is
Yeah.
the best
You guys look
dressed
fabulous.
panel.
We worked hard.
These guys are making us
We coordinated.
These guys are making us all
I mean-
rethink our fashion choices.
Mike brought it today, but come on, right? I guess I have a question. I was in New York when Pride was going on, and I saw so much advertising, and it was really kind of inspiring. But I guess I have a question. Since so many of these companies, as you say, are like run by like old white dudes, do you ever get the feeling like when the green movement came up, people were accused of greenwashing and doing ads, and like, you know, even though they were ruining the environment, they'd like kind of wrap themselves in a green banner. Is there a point where a brand is trying to align with a multicultural community and they're not living the values, and your audience either sniffs it out, or can you give advice to those companies that really want to do the right thing, but they're really not real? Like what should they do?
Yeah,
So-
I would start because I'm going to set them up. Look, we get it. Companies like to make money the way they want to make the money. That's just a basic human truth. I want to generate money, but I want to do it how I want to do it. And we're just entering a world where the market is telling you, you don't get to make the money the way you want anymore, at least not at that clip. Not with those profit gains, not with those margin goals, not with those P&Ls that you got to report to your EVP. That world is essentially gone. I think that's just the hardest thing in human nature, because the most basic instinct of human nature is to what? Defend. And if anything, it's to defend your thought and your own decision making. And we're just at an inflection point where you have to sort of blow that up. The one thing I can give, one of our top clients credit, Lexus, is they spent the time building equity. So they've been doing LGBTQ for like 12 years. They started doing GLAAD and HRC. I mean, they did the community building. We call it the right to direct message. Then we got to a point as an agency where we said, look, you've earned the right to go ask for a sale. You've earned the right to go ask for the business. So, a few years after, we started doing not only national advertising through media, but we started doing dealer advertising, which is, if you want to talk about a sector who is not always necessarily the most comfortable. But there's an evolution to that in terms of being smart about, kind of people have to get along before they go along. I mean, that's just a basic truism. So I think, that's the starting point of thinking about it. It's nothing different relationship building than everybody in the room who's in here in a sales capacity. You got to build some rapport first. And what I'm always amazed is that people get that in a human level, but not in a business level. It's like they cannot make the translation into a business environment to do the same thing they do naturally. So I'll pass it to you guys to add some more context.
Yeah, I mean, take the risk. And here's another thing, too. Just sponsoring an NGO does not align you with the community. Yes, it's for good and it's great, but those are multi-million-dollar not-for-profits that are run like corporations. Take a chance on a for-profit. Take a chance on a new editorial platform that is not a traditional LGBTQ, like Tens Magazine that targets queer black men. You know what I mean? These are the ones that have higher engagement, even though they may have lower numbers, and they have bigger retention and actually a higher return on your investment on that ad dollar, right? But the thing is, and I get this question a lot about the corporate washing of LGBTQ, and a great example, yes, New York Pride. There were flags everywhere, literally everywhere. I look at it obviously as an opportunity, but the difference is the creative being dictated by someone of the community, or is it being dictated by someone who's cis or heteronormative or not LGBTQ? Because that's where the authenticity shines through. Is it authentic? That's it. And millennials and Gen Z even more, the cancel culture, I like to call them Gen Z generation, will find out if it is authentic in 2 seconds, like Black Twitter you were talking about, and they will drag you to filth. It's true.
It's so true. I would say my biggest advice is, like he said, to have someone of color being a part of the creative team. So, for example, when H&M put out this campaign of this cute little black boy in, I believe it was a monkey shirt. Correct me if I'm wrong. Horrible. So I think for these advertisers looking to target the multicultural community, you have to do it tastefully. Do it tastefully and have somebody in the panel that understands what they're putting out there, because our community now is going to react real quick, and they're going to figure it out if it was not done right.
And it's also a matter of getting beyond just the ad itself. That real authenticity also comes by engaging in the community on a lot of other levels. And as publishers, that gives you an incredible opportunity to get the advertiser involved in a whole host of other properties beyond media and engagement, like events, but where that's where a brand really gets the street cred.
Correct, yeah, because you think about publishing has a strategic advantage. It is a narrative-driven business. When you're trying to connect with any segment, any audiences, in particular multicultural audiences, it's a narrative. You have to approach it like, what is your storyline going to be? What do you want them to say about you? How do you want them to see you a year, 2 years, 5, 10 years from now? When you think about some of these brands, it's more like cultural hijacking. It's like, oh, there's a cultural moment. We're going to be there. But the culture's like, yeah, you just showed up, and you didn't even do it well. So if you're going to do that, you got to do it. You have to be very smart, very strategic, but you need to stay with them. You can't be in and out. You can't come in and show up.
Advertise in June during Pride Month.
Right. It's kind of like Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month. Yeah. Brands beat it as a cultural moment, beat Black History Month to death before any other cultural segment in this country. And the average person who's black's like, yeah, we're making history every day. So let's get to 365 and get away from the shortest month of the year. I mean, and that's what the black community said. Like, you picked the shortest month of the year? I mean, what are you really saying? That you have the shortest level of commitment attention span, or the budget has to go the least furthest because it's the least amount of days? These are real dialogues. This is what we really say. So it was brands just like, you know what? We want this consumer in this business. Let's show respect to this consumer every day of the year. And then you get brands like the ones I named, Coca-Cola is another one, who will sit there and say, our growth is going to be on the backs of the Black and Hispanic community, because they've already made the statement of the equity building that they're going to partake in. But again, the strategic advantage of publishing is that you have time to watch your narrative play out. There will be misses, but you can rack up hits essentially along the way. And there's no other business that gets that benefit, because everything else is so transaction and consumption heavy, meaning I used it, did it work, did it fail? It's not that fast failure rate in publishing. It's the story can get better. It's like a good novel that it becomes a page turner, and then you want the next edition. So the publishing community probably has the least amount of excuses because of how it can take time cultivating the audiences and listening in the same breath that it actually writes to it.
Yeah, and if I can just add one thing to this, it's like Albert was saying, it's not just 1 month out of the year. If you want to build cultural equity, literally cultural equity, Lexus has done this, and even just to give you a really simple example, vodka brands have done this for years with Prides. I remember the longest time, Absolute sponsored every Pride, probably took a major loss on Pride season throughout the gay community and all the NGOs and all the different galas and events throughout the year, to the point where gay men, it was the most consumed, within 5 years, the most consumed vodka across the United States. Now Tito's vodka is doing it. And you know what? I'm a huge part of that. I bought a Lexus, I drink Tito's, I wear Steve Madden's, I support brands that invest culturally into my community. And
Loyalty.
And loyalty, brand loyalty. And what's interesting, like even for us, we're dinks. We're dual income, no kids. So we have twice the expendable income of anyone else in this room with children. So there's a lot of brand affinity to just be sitting there on the table. Low-hanging fruit, people.
That great lead into the roundtable on this very topic. Albert, Stephanie, Damian, thanks so much. That was great.